was scrolling through Telegram and I saw this headline on the channel Diversity Max Fry. It's an article from the Telegraph and its title is Tory MP's anger at taxpayer-funded divisive activism on race issues at British Library. This is an article by Craig Simpson and it reads that at the British Library there's been a divisive activism from documents unearthed by the Sunday Telegraph. Internal emails seen by the newspaper reveal a policy guiding staff group claimed racial colour blindness and believing mankind is one human family are actually examples of covert white supremacy. I can't say this with a straight face. So colour blindness, we're not talking about the medical condition, we're talking about racial colour blindness. Where you look at a room of people from different ethnic groups and you see a room full of individuals. You see a bunch of humans and you don't have any bias for or against them. That is apparently white supremacy. And it also just, seeing humans as, a collective species, we're all one big family. That's also covert white supremacy as well. So not just racist, but like the supremacy thing, you're actually trying to take over and destroy them. So it's just a ruse. As an anti-racist antidote to perceived prejudice, resources disseminated at the library urge employees to give money to Black Lives Matter and support the work of Diane Abbott, the Labour politician. So the British Library is telling its staff, presumably it's white staff, to shell out money to give cash to Black Lives Matter and Diane Abbott, because Diane Abbott doesn't have enough money. She needs more money. And she's going to get it from you, Whitey. Presumably this is reparations. Presumably reparations have now started. So white staff also asked fellow white colleagues to educate themselves with a reading list to explaining their racial privilege to them, which was the works of Marxist authors. So that's fantastic. So that kind of makes me think that there's a connection between BLM and Marxism, but that can't be true because I've been told that's not the case. And then later on, it talks about the documentation is supposed to read copious reading material on slavery, policing, and prison in the US. I don't understand what that's got to do with the British Library. What is the US prison policy got to do with London and UK law and UK history? I don't understand the connection. And a chart outlining overt and covert forms of white supremacy. I'd love to see that chart. I think that would be fantastic. And then it then says quite snidely and funnily, it's been pointed out that the definitions used in this documentation would render the Universal Declaration of Human Rights a racist document. Which of course it would, because it claims in its opening chapter about a human family, equal consideration for these different groups. That would be racist. So yeah, they've got to give money to BLM, give money to Diane Abbott. So I thought this was just very, very interesting and strange. So I went on DuckDuckGo and I did a search for colourblindness is white supremacism, and a whole heap of articles appeared. So some of these articles are a bit older, from 2015, 2011, but it's still relevant. We've got an article here on psychotherapy.net by clinical psychologist Margaret M. Clausen, and she informs us that if we hold the perspective of colourblindness, it falls to us as individuals to make it on merit, on individual characteristics versus larger forces. I love this. So you can't treat black people like individuals, because then if they make bad choices or do the wrong thing or cock something up, then then it would be on them. It would be their fault that things had gone wrong and there were consequences to their actions. And that's not fair, because we don't want to treat them like they have their own agency. We need to treat them like children. That's the woke thing to do. So now to me that's pretty racist, but let's keep going. So we've got this article here on everydayfeminism.com by John Greenberg. 7 reasons why colourblindness contributes to racism instead of solves it. So there's a few ways in which he doesn't like colourblindness. Number 1, he's given us colourblindness invalidates people's identities. So race is intimately tied into people's identities and has a connection to their culture, their tradition, their language, their heritage, and it should be it is a genuine source of pride, but not in the white pride kind of way, and we'll link to that in a second. So other than for white people, all the other races, it's a good, your identity of who you are racially, that's a part of who you are, and it's a positive thing, and it's like a source of, I guess, mental or spiritual strength. You can draw upon it and go, oh yes, I'm a proud black man, or I'm a proud Chinese person, something like that. My race is everything to me. You shouldn't deny people their ethnicity, which is very interesting because, and I know I inevitably got a lot of shit for taking the piss out of Laura Towler in the last video, but looping back to that, it's a fair point that she and PA are making, and other people who are nationalistic are making, when they say that, well, look, if different groups can be proud of their race, surely then we need to recognise that white people are a race and that they have pride in who they are as well, because otherwise you're invalidating a part of who they are as a person. I'm sure an ethnically Jewish person wouldn't want to have that denied about them and be ignored, and they weren't allowed to celebrate it. So it would be the same thing, I know that's also because it's religion as well, but you follow me, it's an ethnicity too. And it's interesting as well when he says in point 3, colorblindness narrows white Americans' understanding of the world and leads to disconnection. And he points out that white Americans are more likely than any other group not to see race. There's an interesting contradiction there, because surely if that were the case, then that would mean that they're the group that's least thinking of things in racial terms, which would mean that they were the least racist, right? Because they're not factoring in race when they're looking at it. They're ignoring race and they're focusing on individual merit, because generally speaking, white people are quite individualistic. And it would also imply that we've been taught to think in a way that's not focused through a racial lens. And of course that's true. Back in the 90s, the best decade, the politically correct way of thinking was that you would be colorblind. That was the idea, that we'd had this bad old days of racism where people viewed different races as different and were hostile to each other, and it was tribal and full of conflict. And we could move past that, and we could then have a range of, lots of like kids' TV shows and things. You'd have a multi-ethnic groups of kids, like Hey Arnold or something, for cartoon for kids back then, and the idea, it was great because everyone, you had different people, white kids, black kids, they're all friends together, and it wasn't an issue, and it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a big deal at all. And that's apparently bad now, I presume, because what's happened is that they've kind of written themselves into a corner here, where after indoctrinating whites to not see things through a racial lens for a couple of decades, they then realised that if everyone was just looking at things through a individualistic lens, then they wouldn't be able to have people play the race card. So you were denying people a kind of a special power that they could use to get ahead without merit, and have power over others through playing that card. And the other thing is that you couldn't then use race as a form of division to lead to minority groups rioting in the streets. So, which is bad if you're trying to fundamentally undermine and change society and damage the majority groups. So they kind of wrote themselves into a corner through the 90s, and now they've got to change that and do a robust about turn and make it as a negative, that we're not seeing race. We have to see race now. That's very important. And then finally, we'll just look at this article here with Salon.com, 5 Reasons White Pride is Always Racist, by Matthew Rosa. Now, in this, it's not a particularly good article. He's basically just trying to say that if you have pride in your ethnic group, that's, as we know, that's absolutely fine, unless of course you happen to be white, in which case you need to be made aware that actually there are no white people. Whiteness is an artificial sociological construct. This then, at this point, my brain's in free fall because now I'm trying to grapple with this. So you're being oppressed by white people who are racist with their privilege, but the white people don't actually exist. It's only social. Okay. But quite consistently it happens to be those people who we all know to be white, and we can look at and go, well, those are white people, right? And they go, no, white people don't exist. In fact, the notion of white culture is actually a myth, as Nell Irvin Painter explains in her book, The History of White People. Our culture was founded in 1789 round about the same time that the German Blumenbach was inventing Caucasians. And this was the moment of racialization, she told Salon. So they've got this woman, Nell Painter, who believes that white people were invented in 1789. I wonder who she thinks was living in Europe for several thousand years before that. Were they black? And then, of course, we go down further rabbit holes and digressions with things like Cheddar Man, and then they argue that originally they were black, who have somehow become white, but white people are the oppressors, but white people don't actually exist, but they definitely do exist when they want them to be the villain, but we can't have them exist when they want to group together and go, hey, we're all whites, let's have pride in who we are, because that would be evil. All of this stuff is very strange, badly thought out gibberish, which seems to be a kind of just a big chunk of bad programming for the mind. Concepts that, when followed through, lead to essentially the denial of the existence of whites as a race, a disempowering of whites specifically as a targeted thing, where they cannot have pride in who they are, and a sense of promotion of all other groups that should therefore be seen through a collectivist racial lens, going against the grain of the last couple of decades of conditioning. All very bizarre, promoted by a combination of Marxist blacks and a ethnically Jewish media. One can only hope that as articles and ideas like this are bandied around, it will hopefully stimulate something in the, up until now, largely colourblind white population, and maybe perhaps make them reflect on, given our general love of equality, considering that what is good for one lot may be good for us as well, and that perhaps we should have pride in ourselves and our achievements, and then view with suspicion other groups that are attempting to suppress that spirit. Food for thought.